The electronic lock clicked open at 7:42 p.m., and the first thing I saw was her face, all bright-eyed innocence with dimples that appeared like punctuation marks when she smiled. Those black and white eyes, as she called them later, though they were just ordinary brown, took me in with what I'd learned was perfectly calculated curiosity. "You're back, Aunt Victoria," she said, her voice light and crisp like wind chimes. I froze, my designer suitcase suddenly heavy in my hand. I hadn't been Aunt anything since my niece outgrew the title at 6. Instinctively, my eyes swept the foyer, searching for William. My husband of 5 years was descending the spiral staircase, his movements deliberate, his expression unreadable as always. "Will, come here," the girl called with a cheerful wave that seemed too familiar, too intimate. William walked straight toward me, not her. "Victoria, this is Chloe Dawson. Her father is Michael Dawson. He helped me during the merger transition last year. She's starting at Harbor University and needs a place to stay while she gets settled." I took off my sunglasses slowly, the California sunset bleeding through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Pacific Heights mansion. The golden light caught the dust motes dancing between us, 3 strangers in a space I'd thought was sacred to 2. "I don't recall having a niece your age," I said, my voice colder than I intended, "considering my husband is only 4 years older than me." William stiffened almost imperceptibly. Only someone who'd studied his every micro-expression for years would notice. "Victoria, she didn't mean." "Sorry, I misspoke," Chloe interjected, biting her plump lower lip. The gesture was youthful, practiced. "I should have said, sister-in-law Victoria." Her correction came too late. The damage was done, the careful boundary between our world and hers already breached. "A guest is still a guest," William said quickly, stepping between us physically now. "Chloe didn't mean any harm." Her father specifically asked, "Who said I agreed to her staying here?" I cut him off, my gaze fixed on his face, searching for some sign that this was a joke, a misunderstanding, anything but what it clearly was. For 5 years I'd believed I knew this man. William Sterling, CEO of Sterling Capital, was famous for his boundaries. His study was off-limits without explicit permission. He despised having strangers in our home, which was why our 7,000-square-foot mansion had no live-in staff, only scheduled cleaners and a discreet security team. He valued privacy above all else, or so I'd thought. William pressed his thin lips together, a sign of irritation he rarely showed. "Victoria." Just then Chloe reached out, a pale, delicate finger extending to poke the back of William's hand. The contact lasted less than a second, but in our world of calculated distances, it might as well have been an embrace. "Will, did I cause trouble?" Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried. His brows relaxed, the tension melting from his shoulders. "Go unpack your things. I'll handle this." The setting sun cast a golden glow across his sharp features, softening edges I'd never seen soften for anyone but me, and even then only briefly in our most private moments. His voice held a trace of something unfamiliar, tenderness. My heart clenched violently. That tone. I'd heard it exactly once before, the morning after our first anniversary, when he'd thought I was still asleep and whispered something against my hair. I'd replayed it in my mind for months, that fleeting warmth from a man known for his composure, his restraint, his emotional economy. Even in our most intimate moments, William revealed himself in fragments. A gasp here, a vulnerable glance there, always quickly reassembled into the impeccable businessman by morning. Never like this. Never in full view of a third party. Chloe gave me an apologetic smile that didn't reach her eyes, then playfully stuck out her tongue at William. "I'm not a child, you know." A flicker of something, amusement, affection, crossed his face. And in that instant I realized with stomach-dropping clarity, the man before me had already changed. I was witnessing emotions I hadn't known he possessed, all directed at this girl he'd supposedly just met. When Chloe finally retreated upstairs, dragging a suitcase that looked suspiciously like the one William had taken to Milan last month, he turned to me. "You're traveling constantly for the gallery expansion," he said, his voice returning to its usual measured cadence. "I'm working late most nights. Having her here won't affect our routines." "William," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "are we really having this conversation in the foyer like I'm a delivery person you're dismissing?" His eyes flicked to my Louis Vuitton suitcases, still stacked by the entrance where I'd dropped them. He faltered, another rarity. Let me get those. The Sterling and Montgomery families had married for business, yes. My family's art empire needed his financial acumen. His venture capital firm needed our cultural cachet. But since our wedding, we'd built something beyond the contract. Something respectful if not passionate. We gave each other space but also presence. William, for all his flaws, was a gentleman. Except it seemed not this time. In our bedroom, a minimalist sanctuary of cream and slate gray, I began unpacking with mechanical precision. William leaned against the doorframe, watching. Michael Dawson helped me when Sterling Capital nearly collapsed 3 years ago, he said quietly. He called in favors, secured bridge financing. We owe him. We owe him financial consideration, not housing his adult daughter, I snapped, shutting the suitcase with more force than necessary. You know I have that condo near campus. Why does she need to be in our home? William frowned. The condo's being renovated. Chloe needs a place immediately. Then put her in a hotel. The Fairmont is 5 minutes away. She's 20, Victoria. She shouldn't be alone in a hotel. I turned to face him fully. I travel 2 weeks out of every month. You work late but come home every night. That means most evenings it'll just be you and Chloe. Alone. In our house. The implication hung between us, ugly and unavoidable. No wife would accept that arrangement, I finished quietly. William's jaw tightened. For a long moment he said nothing, just studied me as if I were a difficult contract clause he needed to negotiate around. Finally he nodded once. The condo renovations finish next week. She'll stay until then. It was a compromise, but it felt like a defeat. That night William drove Chloe to the Fairmont himself. I watched from the window as she clung to him at the car door, her face tilted up, saying something that made him shake his head with what looked like fond exasperation. When his headlights disappeared down the hill, I poured myself a generous glass of Cabernet and tried to remember the last time William had looked at me with anything approaching fondness. Our marriage had never been a fairy tale. We'd entered it with open eyes and signed prenuptials that would make a lawyer weep. But somewhere between the charity galas and business mergers, between the quiet dinners and the occasional vacation to places where no one knew us, I'd fallen in love with my husband. A fatal error, as my mother had warned. Never love a man you married for business, she'd said, her own 3 marriages to increasingly wealthy men serving as testament. It's like bringing your heart to a board meeting. I'd laughed then. I wasn't laughing now. William returned just after midnight. I pretended to be asleep when he slipped into bed, his body warm and familiar against mine. For a moment he didn't move, just breathed quietly in the dark. Then his arm slid around my waist, pulling me against him. Are you awake? He murmured against my hair. I didn't respond. He sighed, his breath warm on my neck. She's just a kid, Victoria. Overwhelmed by the city. She didn't mean to disrespect you. I remained silent, playing my part in this familiar dance. His explanation, my silent acceptance, the eventual resumption of normalcy. But something had shifted. The bedrock of our marriage, which I'd believed was mutual respect if not passionate love, now felt like sand. His kisses started at my shoulder, soft, apologetic, then my neck. When he turned me to face him, his eyes were dark and unreadable in the moonlight. She only came to the house once, he whispered between kisses. Didn't even have time to sit down before you. Why are you so jealous? The word landed like a slap. Jealous. As if this were about petty emotion rather than violated boundaries. I turned and bit his lip, not playfully but hard enough to draw a sharp inhale. Only when I saw the flash of genuine surprise in his eyes did I whisper, "Remember who you're married to, William." He didn't reply. Instead, his hands tightened on my hips and he pulled me into a kiss that felt more like possession than passion. The sex that followed was fierce, almost angry, as if he were trying to prove something, to me or to himself, I wasn't sure. Afterward, as he slept with one arm thrown across my waist, I stared at the ceiling and thought about the girl with the dimples and the calculated innocence. Chloe Dawson had been in our lives for less than 12 hours, and already the cracks were showing. A week later, I flew to New York for the gallery opening. The new space in Chelsea was a triumph. All concrete floors and clever lighting, showcasing a collection of emerging West Coast artists I'd curated personally. The reviews were glowing, the sales spectacular. By all measures, I should have been euphoric. Instead, I found myself checking my phone obsessively, waiting for William's usually terse check-ins. They came but later than usual and with a strange new shorthand that felt fuff. On my third night in the city, after a celebratory dinner with investors, I decided to surprise him by coming home a day early. I sent a text from the airport lounge. Flight moved up. Home tomorrow night. Miss you. Almost instantly he replied, tomorrow's perfect. I'll book us a table at Quince. I smiled, the tension in my shoulders easing slightly. Then my eyes dropped to the message bubble beneath his. It was a sticker, an animated pink rabbit winking mischievously. I froze. William didn't use stickers. William didn't even use emojis beyond the occasional professional thumbs up. The William the first knew considered digital informality a character flaw. Before I could process this, my phone buzzed again. This time with a message from my friend Rachel, who taught art history at Harbor University. Call me when you can, her text read. Something's off with William. Beneath it was a screenshot from Instagram. The account belonged to Chloe Dawson. The photo showed a shattered ceramic vase on what looked like marble flooring I recognized all too well, the floor of our sunroom. My blood went cold. The vase was a Hoggy-ware piece from the Edo period, a birthday gift I'd bought William at auction 2 years ago. He'd been captivated by its imperfect beauty, the way the crackled glaze told a story of fire and time. It had cost $325,000 and he kept it on his desk, often absently tracing its contours during phone calls. Now it lay in pieces. The caption read, "When you're more precious than $325,000 of history, smiling face with halo." The emoji, that same damned wink. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Around me, the airport hummed with oblivious travelers, their lives still intact, their marriages presumably unhaunted by 20-year-old girls with destructive tendencies and Instagram accounts. Rachel called as I boarded. "I saw it this morning," she said without preamble. "One of my students follows her." "What the hell is going on, Victoria?" "I don't know," I said, my voice strangely calm. "But I'm about to find out." The flight home was 5 hours of hell. I replayed every interaction with William over the last month, searching for clues I'd missed. The late nights at the office that had become more frequent. The new passcode on his tablet. The way he'd started turning his phone face down on the counter. Small things easily explained. A pattern impossible to ignore. My driver Marcus met me at SFO. His usual cheerful greeting died on his lips when he saw my face. "Home, Mrs. Sterling?" he asked carefully. "Home," I confirmed. The sun was setting as we crossed the Golden Gate Bridge, painting the water in tones of rose and gold. I'd always loved this view, this city, this life I'd built. Now I looked at it through the lens of potential loss and everything looked different, beautiful but fragile like that shattered vase. When we pulled into the driveway, the house looked peaceful. Too peaceful. I told Marcus to take the night off, then stood for a long moment at the front door, my key in hand. Some part of me already knew what I'd find inside. Some part had known since I saw Chloe Dawson's dimples. Taking a deep breath, I turned the key. The sound that greeted me was laughter. Light, feminine, and intimately familiar. Not because I knew Chloe's laugh, but because I knew William's response to it. A low, warm chuckle I heard maybe 3 times a year. They were in the kitchen. William sat at the island, head bowed in concentration over a pomegranate. He was peeling it with intense focus, his usually immaculate fingers stained pink with juice. Chloe stood close beside him, close enough that her skirt brushed his arm. "You've been in California how long and never had a fresh pomegranate?" she teased. "They're everywhere here." A drop of juice landed on his cheek. She reached out without hesitation, her thumb brushing it away. Her fingers lingered for a heartbeat too long, tracing the line of his jaw before dropping away. Their eyes met. Held. And in that suspended moment I saw it all. The charge between them, the unspoken something that had already grown in the fertile soil of my absence. I must have made a sound because Chloe's eyes flicked to me. She jumped back as if shocked, hands flying to her mouth in a gesture so theatrical it would have been laughable under different circumstances. "Victoria. I mean sister-in-law Victoria. We were just..." William stood so quickly his stool scraped loudly against the floor. "You're back early." His voice held no warmth now. Just surprise and something else. Guilt maybe, or irritation. I didn't answer him. Instead I walked to the island and looked down at the bowl. It was nearly full of pomegranate seeds, each one glistening like a tiny ruby. He'd been at this for a while. Beautiful, I said softly. I remembered asking William to peel pomegranates for me. The ones from the farmer's market in October were always the sweetest. I'd buy them by the crate, filling the fridge, asking him to share them with me. He'd always refused. Too much work for too little reward, he'd say, pushing the fruit back toward me. I don't understand why you bother with them. All seeds and mess. I'd been disappointed but never angry. Men had their quirks, their refusals. William had more than most, but I'd accepted them as part of the package. Now I realized my error. William was capable of patience. Capable of tedious, time-consuming tasks done for the pleasure of someone else. Just not for me. A cold fury rose in my chest, sudden and violent. Before I could think, my hand shot out, sweeping the bowl off the island. It shattered against the marble floor with a sound like gunfire. Pomegranate seeds scattered like drops of blood across pale stone. Porcelain shards skittered in every direction. In the ringing silence that followed, I met William's shocked eyes. I suppose, I said, my voice dangerously calm, this little welcome wasn't for me. Chloe stammered something, an apology, an excuse, I didn't care which. My attention was fixed on William, on the storm gathering in his eyes. Shut up, I said, not even looking at her. The words hung in the air, shocking in their bluntness. I'd spent 5 years cultivating poise, the graceful restraint expected of Victoria Sterling. But that woman, the one who smiled through tedious fundraisers and nodded politely at inane comments, seemed to have vanished, leaving this raw, furious creature in her place. Chloe's eyes widened, her mouth forming a perfect O of surprise. When my husband and I are speaking, I continued, my voice ice, there is no place for an outsider to interrupt. William's expression darkened. Victoria, calm down. You're not yourself right now. And who am I, William? I took a step toward him. The dutiful wife who doesn't notice when another woman moves into her home? The understanding spouse who overlooks flirtation happening in her own kitchen. I only invited Chloe for dinner, he said, but the defensiveness in his voice betrayed him. I thought we could all eat together when you returned, but your schedule. My schedule? I laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. Don't you dare make this about my work. Not when you're the one who encouraged the New York expansion. Not when you've spent the last 6 months working later and later, leaving this house empty for. I stopped myself. The accusation hung between us, unfinished but understood. For what, Victoria? William's voice dropped to that dangerous quiet I knew well, the one he used in boardrooms right before dismantling an opponent's argument. What exactly are you suggesting happened here? I looked from him to Chloe, who had tears brimming in her eyes now. Whether from genuine upset or skilled performance, I couldn't tell. Not long ago, I said slowly, I had the security system upgraded. Cameras in the living areas, the kitchen, the hallways. Discreet but comprehensive. William's eyes flickered just for a second. He hadn't known. I'd arranged it while he was in Tokyo last month, telling him it was a standard update. Everything from the last hour is recorded, I continued. Clear as crystal. Would you like me to pull it up? To see what the cameras captured before I walked in. Chloe's face drained of color. She looked at William, her expression pleading. Nothing happened, William said, but his voice lacked conviction now. No, I agreed. Nothing happened. But if I'd come home an hour later? Or if I'd stayed in New York another day as planned? I shook my head. We both know what almost happened, William. We've been married too long for pretend. Chloe made a small choked sound. I'm sorry, she whispered, tears finally spilling over. This is all my fault. I'll just... She nearly ran from the room, her footsteps echoing through the silent house. A moment later, the front door opened and closed with a soft click. William exhaled deeply, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a gesture of agitation he rarely allowed himself. Victoria, you've gone too far. She's just a confused kid who developed a crush. And you. And me. I folded my arms, bracing for whatever accusation was coming. You humiliated her. In our home. Our home, I repeated. Yes. Our home. Not hers. Not Michael Dawson's daughter's temporary crash pad. Ours. For a long moment, we just stared at each other across the pomegranate-strewn floor. The sunset had faded to twilight, casting the kitchen in deep blue shadows. "Are you clear about your feelings?" I asked quietly. "As I need to know, William. Right now. Are you clear?" He looked away, his gaze fixed on the darkened window. "She's 20 years old, Victoria. That's not an answer." His jaw tightened. "What do you want me to say? That I'm attracted to her? Fine. She's young, she's vibrant, she looks at me like I don't know. Something other than a spreadsheet with legs." The words landed like physical blows, each one carving away a piece of the life we'd built. "But nothing happened," he continued, finally meeting my eyes. "And nothing will. You have my word." "Your word," I echoed. The phrase felt hollow, a currency that had suddenly devalued. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing amid the wreckage. In our bedroom, I methodically began packing again. Not for a business trip this time, but for an indefinite stay at the Fairmont. The irony wasn't lost on me. William didn't follow me. He didn't try to stop me. When I dragged my suitcase downstairs an hour later, he was in his study, the door closed, a sliver of light beneath it the only sign he was still in the house. The Cold War had begun. 5 days passed in a strange, suspended reality. I moved into a suite at the Fairmont. Not the same one Chloe had occupied, I made sure of that. I threw myself into work, scheduling back-to-back meetings about the gallery expansion, taking calls at all hours, filling every moment so I wouldn't have to think about William. About Chloe. About the pomegranate seeds scattered across my kitchen floor. On the morning of the 6th day, I woke with a strange heaviness in my stomach. At first, I blamed it on stress, on the room service food, on the endless glasses of wine I'd been drinking to quiet my mind. But as I stood under the shower's too forceful spray, counting back weeks, a cold certainty settled over me. The drugstore pregnancy test confirmed it 20 minutes later. 2 bold pink lines stared back at me from the little plastic window. I sank onto the edge of the bathtub, the test still in my hand. A child. William's child. The heir both our families had been politely hinting we should produce for the last 2 years. I thought of the baby's room in our Pacific Heights home, the one we'd vaguely discussed converting from the guest room, someday. I thought of William's expression when his sister had announced her pregnancy last Christmas. A flicker of something that might have been longing before he'd schooled his features back to polite interest. Mostly, I thought of the girl with the dimples and the shattered vase. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from William. "We need to talk. Tonight. I'll pick you up at 7. I stared at the message, then at the test in my hand. Perhaps this changed things. Perhaps this was the universe's way of forcing a reconciliation. A reset button on a marriage that had veered dangerously off course. I typed back. "But not the Fairmont. Come to the gallery. 7 o'clock, he confirmed. I spent the day in a haze, making decisions on autopilot. Between meetings, I called my assistant, Evelyn, and asked her to order a cake from William's favorite bakery. Small, simple, with a message written in dark chocolate script. "Congratulations, you're going to be a father." Maybe it was sentimental. Maybe it was desperate. But the alternative, telling him in some sterile restaurant while making strained conversation, felt impossible. At 6:45, I was waiting in my office when Evelyn buzzed. "Mr. Sterling is here. Send him up." William looked tired when he walked in. There were shadows under his eyes, and his usually crisp suit had the slightly rumpled quality of a long day. He didn't kiss me hello, just nodded, his eyes scanning my face as if looking for clues. "You look well," he said, the formality between us now a tangible thing. "You don't," I replied honestly. A faint smile touched his lips. "Long week." We stood there awkwardly for a moment, 2 people who had shared a bed for 5 years suddenly unsure how to occupy the same room. "There's something I want to show you," I began, gesturing toward the small sitting area where Evelyn had set up the cake. But before I could continue, William's phone rang. The specific ringtone, a snippet of classical piano he'd assigned to business contacts, cut through the tension. He glanced at the screen, frowned, and silenced it. "Sorry. Where were you?" The phone rang again. Same tone. "You should get it," I said, though everything in me was screaming for him to ignore it, to focus on this moment, on us, on the secret I was about to reveal. He hesitated, then pulled the phone from his pocket. "Sterling." I watched his face as he listened. Saw the initial irritation shift to concern, then to something sharper. Alarm maybe, or protectiveness. "Where are you?" he asked, his voice tight. How much have you had to drink? My stomach dropped. A pause as he listened to the response. Then, stay where you are. Don't go anywhere with anyone. I'm coming. He hung up and turned to me, his expression already shifting into what I recognized as his crisis management mode. Victoria, I need to go. It's Chloe. She's drunk at some club in the Mission and the friends she came with left her. She's scared. The words hung between us, absurd and devastating in equal measure. William, I said slowly, do you hear yourself right now? Do you know what day this is? He blinked, momentarily confused. Thursday. It's our anniversary, I whispered. 5 years. For a second, genuine shock registered on his face. Then guilt quickly masked. Shit. Victoria, I'm sorry, I've had this acquisition brewing all weekend. And yet you remember Chloe is at a club in the Mission, I finished for him. You remember she's scared. You remember to go rescue her. She's alone in a strange city, he said, his jaw tightening. If something happens to her, I'll never forgive myself. Or be able to face Michael. For God's sake, William, she's 20, not 12. She can call an Uber. She can call campus security. She doesn't need her father's business associate to play knight in shining armor. He took a step toward me, his expression softening in a way that felt patronizing. Victoria, I know you're upset about what happened last week. But this is different. This is a kid in trouble. Look at me, I said, my voice trembling with the effort to keep it steady. Look at me and tell me you have no feelings for her. That this is purely a fiduciary responsibility to Michael Dawson. That if she were 50 and unattractive, you'd be rushing out the door right now. His eyes met mine, held. For a long, terrible moment I thought he might lie. I almost wanted him to. Then his gaze dropped. I'll take you home first. We can talk after. It wasn't a denial. It was, in its way, the most honest answer he could have given. No, I said, the word final. You go. Be her hero. Victoria. Go. He hesitated, conflict warring on his face. Then with a curt nod he turned and left. I stood there in my beautiful office with its view of the Bay Bridge, the unopened cake on the table, the pregnancy test burning a hole in my purse, and watched my husband choose another woman. The drive back to Pacific Heights was a blur of streetlights and bitter realizations. I'd told William not to take me home, but where else was there to go? The hotel room felt like a prison. My parents' house in Atherton would invite questions I wasn't ready to answer. So I went home to the empty mansion, the Uber dropping me at the foot of the steep hill leading up to our gate. The driver offered to take me all the way up, but I declined, needing the air, the movement, something to counteract the numbness spreading through me. I'd walked maybe a quarter mile when the heels, Louboutins beautiful and utterly impractical, began to rub blisters on my heels. The pain was sharp, specific, a welcome distraction from the deeper ache in my chest. Finally I stopped, yanked the shoes off and continued barefoot. The pavement was cool against my soles, the occasional pebble biting into tender skin. By the time I reached the gate my feet were raw, crimson smearing the pristine concrete of our driveway. The security guard, a retired cop named Frank who'd worked for us for 3 years, stared at my bare feet with undisguised shock. Mrs. Sterling? Are you all right? Where are your shoes? I forced a smile, the expression feeling cracked and unnatural on my face. They didn't fit. I threw them away. He looked like he wanted to ask more, but I walked past him through the gate, up the winding path to the front door. The house was silent, dark. I didn't turn on the lights, just moved through the familiar spaces by memory. The living room with its Eames chairs, the dining room with the table that seated 12 but had only ever held 2, the kitchen where pomegranate seeds had been swept up but the ghost of them remained. In our bedroom I stripped off my clothes and stood under a scalding shower until the water ran cold. Then I wrapped myself in a robe and sat on the edge of the bed, my phone in my hand. No messages from William. No missed calls. It was after midnight now. He'd been gone for over 4 hours. How long did it take to rescue a damsel in distress from a Mission District club? As if in answer my phone buzzed. Not a call or text from William, but a Facebook notification. Chloe Dawson has sent you a friend request. I stared at the screen. The profile picture showed her laughing, head thrown back, sunlight catching the gold highlights in her hair. She looked young, carefree. Everything I was not in that moment. My finger hovered over the ignore button. Then, driven by some masochistic impulse I couldn't name, I accepted. Almost instantly a message appeared. No text. Just a video file. I tapped it open. The scene was dim, lit by the pulsing colored lights of a club. The camera shook slightly as if being held by someone unsteady. And there, in the center of the frame, was William. He looked utterly out of place in his tailored suit, his posture rigid with anger as he loomed over Chloe. She was wearing a dress that might have been a shirt on someone with less confidence, her makeup smudged, eyes swimming with drunken tears. The audio was garbled by bass-heavy music, but I could read William's lips. "What the hell were you thinking?" Chloe said something back, her expression defiant even through the tears. Then William did something that made my breath catch. His restraint snapped. In a moment I couldn't unsee, he crossed a boundary that should never be crossed. Chloe yelped, then laughed. A wild, reckless sound. She said something else and William's face changed. The anger evaporated, replaced by something darker, hungrier. He pulled her up, his hand tangling in her hair, and kissed her. Not a gentle kiss. Not a hesitant exploration. This was possession, surrender, a line crossed with such definitive force that there could be no going back. The video lasted 17 seconds. I watched it 3 times for 5, as if repetition could change what I was seeing, could rewrite the narrative into something less devastating. It couldn't. When I finally looked away, dawn was breaking over the bay, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that felt like a mockery. The cake Evelyn had ordered sat on my desk, the chocolate message now melted into an illegible smear. I picked up my phone, my fingers moving with a calm that felt disconnected from the screaming inside me. The call connected on the second ring. "Victoria? Do you know what time it is?" "I need a divorce," I said, my voice steady and clear. "Draft the papers as soon as possible, James. Full dissolution. I'll send you the details in the morning." My lawyer, James Whitaker, was silent for a moment. Then, "Are you sure? This isn't something to decide in the middle of the night after." "I'm sure. Call me when you have something to review." I hung up before he could respond. As if on cue, the electronic lock at the front door beeped. A moment later, footsteps echoed through the silent house, moving toward the bedroom. William appeared in the doorway, his suit jacket gone, his tie loosened. He looked exhausted, rumpled, and, for the first time since I'd known him, truly uncertain. His eyes found me sitting in the window seat, the first light of morning catching the tears I hadn't realized I was crying. "Victoria," he began, his voice rough. I didn't speak, just held up my phone. The video paused on the frame where his mouth was crushed against Chloe's. His face went pale. All the explanations, all the apologies he'd undoubtedly rehearsed on the drive home, seemed to die on his lips. "It's not what it looks like," he said finally, the words hollow even to his own ears, judging by the way he winced as he said them. I stood, my bare feet silent on the cool hardwood. "I want a divorce." The words hung between us, simple and absolute. William stared at me as if I'd spoken in a language he didn't understand. "What?" "You heard me. Victoria, be reasonable. We can work through this. I made a mistake. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary," I interrupted. "A mistake is missing a flight. What you did wasn't a mistake, William. It was a choice. A series of choices. And I'm done." He took a step toward me, his hand reaching out as if to touch me, then dropping when I flinched away. "You don't mean that. I've already called James." For a long moment he just stared at me, his expression shifting through disbelief, anger, and finally, the one that cut deepest, a kind of resigned acceptance. "Fine," he said, the word clipped. "If that's what you want." He turned and left the room, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. A moment later I heard the front door open and close. I stood there for a long time, watching the sun climb higher over the city. Somewhere in this house was a positive pregnancy test. Somewhere in this city was a man who had been my husband. And somewhere between us was a girl with dimples who had broken something that couldn't be fixed. The fracture was complete. All that remained was to divide the pieces. The days following my announcement bled together in a haze of legal paperwork and sleepless nights. James Whitaker, my family's lawyer for 3 generations, arrived at the gallery the next morning with a folder thick with documents and an expression of paternal concern. "Victoria," he began, settling into the chair across from my desk. Before we proceed, I need you to understand what you're walking away from. The prenuptial agreement is comprehensive. I helped draft it, James. I know what it says. He sighed, removing his glasses to clean them, a nervous habit I'd seen since childhood. The Sterling Capital shares revert to William. The Montgomery Gallery shares revert to you. The Pacific Heights property was purchased with commingled funds, so it will be sold and divided. The vacation homes, the art collection. He trailed off, looking at me meaningfully. It's a clean severance, but it's also a significant financial blow to both of you. I don't care about the money. You should, he said gently. You built that empire together. To walk away with just your gallery. It's not just a gallery, I snapped, then immediately regretted it. I'm sorry, James. It's been a long. I couldn't finish the sentence. Long what? A long 24 hours? A long 5 years that had suddenly collapsed? James nodded, his expression softening. I'll have the preliminary documents ready by end of day. But Victoria, he hesitated. Is there any chance of reconciliation? Infidelity clauses are difficult to prove without. I have video, I said flatly. He winced. I see. After he left, I sat at my desk, staring at the skyline without seeing it. My phone buzzed incessantly, calls from my mother, from William's sister, from mutual friends who'd undoubtedly heard the news already. San Francisco's high society was a small, vicious ecosystem, and we were currently the most interesting carcass being picked over. I ignored them all. Around noon, Evelyn buzzed. Mr. Sterling is here. My heart did a strange, painful flip. Send him up. William looked worse than he had last night, pale with shadows like bruises under his eyes. He carried a small velvet box, which he placed on my desk with a carefulness that felt ceremonial. I know you said you want a divorce, he began, his voice rough. But before you make this final, I want you to have this. He opened the box. Inside, nestled against midnight blue velvet, was the Sterling family necklace, a delicate Edwardian diamond and sapphire piece that had belonged to his grandmother, then his mother. I'd admired it for years, had even hinted once or twice that I'd love to wear it to the opera ball. William had always demurred. It's for special occasions, he'd say, though what occasion was more special than our marriage had never been clear. Now he lifted it from the box, the diamonds catching the afternoon light. Here, he said, moving behind me. Let me put it on you. For a moment I was tempted. Not by the jewelry, though it was beautiful, but by the gesture. The symbolism. The version of our marriage where this might have meant something. Then I remembered the video. The way he'd kissed her. The way he'd chosen her. I didn't move. It's too late for that, William. It's never too late. His voice was low, urgent. We can fix this. Go to counseling. Take a trip. Whatever you need. I turned to face him, pulling out my phone. The video was still there, paused at the most damning frame. I held it up between us. William's face went white. The necklace dangled from his fingers, forgotten. Tell me how we fix that, I said quietly. His lips parted, but no sound came out. For the first time in our marriage, William Sterling, the man who always had an answer, a strategy, a counterargument, was utterly speechless. The divorce papers, I continued, my voice strangely calm. James will send them to you by Monday. Victoria. And take that back, I said, nodding toward the necklace. It's an heirloom. It should go to someone who, I trailed off, the unspoken words hanging between us. Someone who means something to you. Someone like her. He stared at me for a long moment, his expression shifting from pleading to something harder, colder. Fine, he said finally, snapping the box shut. If that's how you want it. He left without another word, the necklace still on my desk. I stared at it for a long time before opening a drawer and dropping it inside, out of sight. The next week passed in a surreal limbo. William, apparently deciding I was simply throwing a tantrum that required more elaborate appeasement, began what I could only describe as a charm offensive. He sent flowers to the gallery every morning, exotic orchids my favorite. He had gourmet lunches delivered from restaurants we'd frequented during better times. He texted good morning and good night with a consistency that would have been touching if it hadn't felt so desperately calculated. One afternoon he showed up at the gallery in person, carrying boxes of pastries from Tartine. My staff, A mix of ambitious young art historians and seasoned curators, watched with poorly concealed fascination as William Sterling, CEO of one of the city's most powerful investment firms, played the part of contrite husband. "Victoria," he said, setting the boxes on the reception desk with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I thought your team might appreciate an afternoon pick-me-up." Evelyn shot me a questioning look. I gave a slight nod. "That's very generous of you, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice carefully neutral. One of the newer assistants, a bright-eyed girl named Sophie who hadn't yet learned the art of professional detachment, giggled. "You two are so sweet. Relationship goals for real." William's smile became more genuine as he looked at me, a silent "see? This is how we're supposed to be." I felt a surge of cold anger. He was performing for an audience, constructing a narrative where we were the perfect power couple working through a minor rough patch. Where I was the emotional wife and he was the patient, doting husband. Well, two could play that game. I gestured toward the pastries. "Evelyn, why don't you distribute these? But be careful with the mango tarts. You know I can't be near them." Evelyn, who'd been with me for 8 years and had personally called the ambulance when I'd accidentally eaten a dessert containing mango at a charity event, nodded smoothly. "Of course, Victoria." She began handing out the pastries, carefully setting aside anything containing mango. William watched, his brow furrowed in confusion. "You don't like the mango ones?" he asked. Evelyn answered for me, her voice cool. "Victoria has a severe mango allergy, Mr. Sterling. Anaphylactic. She can't even be in the same room with it." The silence that followed was absolute. Every staff member paused, their attention snapping to William with dawning comprehension. He blinked, his expression shifting through confusion, embarrassment, and finally a flush of anger he quickly suppressed. "Right," he said, the word tight. "I must have forgotten. 5 years of marriage," I said softly, not looking at him. "And you forgot the thing that could literally kill me." The gallery was so quiet I could hear the hum of the climate control system. William's jaw worked. After a long moment he muttered, "I'll let you get back to work," and left without another word. The door hadn't fully closed before the whispers began. Back in my office, I allowed myself exactly 3 minutes to feel the sting of his forgetfulness before pushing it aside. There were more important things to focus on. Like the notification that had just popped up on my screen. A forwarded link from Rachel with the subject line, "You need to see this." It was a post on Harbor University's student forum. The title made my blood run cold. "CEOs and co-eds. Is Sterling Capital's president funding his mistress's education?" The post didn't name names, but the details were specific enough to be unmistakable. It mentioned a prominent local CEO, a 20-year-old student from out of state, and late-night study sessions at a Pacific Heights mansion. The comments were worse. Speculation about gifts, about favors, about the kind of transactional relationship that made for salacious gossip but eroded reputations. I read it twice, my hands steady on the keyboard. Then I picked up the phone. Rachel answered on the first ring. "You saw it. Did you post this?" "God, no. But I know who did. One of Chloe's roommates. Apparently she's been bragging about her special friendship with William and the other girls got sick of it." I closed my eyes. "This is going to blow up." "It already has," Rachel said grimly. The Chronicle picked it up. "It'll be in tomorrow's society section." Of course it would. William Sterling was news. The disintegration of our marriage was bigger news. Add a young, pretty student to the mix and it was front-page fodder. I spent the rest of the afternoon fielding calls. From journalists pretending to be sympathetic, from friends fishing for details, from my mother demanding to know why she was hearing about this from her tennis partner. By 5 o'clock I was exhausted. I told Evelyn to hold all calls and was gathering my things to leave when the door to my office flew open. William stood there, his face thunderous. "We need to talk. Now." He slammed the door behind him, the glass rattling in its frame. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. I leaned back in my chair, feigning a calm I didn't feel. "I'm not sure what you're referring to." "Don't play dumb, Victoria." He tossed a printout of the forum post onto my desk. "Inciting students to cyberbully someone? Dragging innocent people into our mess." I picked up the paper, studied it for a moment, then looked back at him. "Innocent? You mean Chloe? The girl you kissed in a club? The one who's living in the apartment I paid for? That has nothing to do with." It has everything to do with it. I stood, my composure cracking. She's not innocent, William. And neither are you. As for cyberbullying, I gestured to the paper. Is anything written here untrue? Are you not seeing her? Did you not kiss her? He drew in a long breath, visibly trying to control his temper. I made a mistake. One mistake. And yes, it's humiliating for everyone involved. But I've ended it with her. As of last night, it's over. The words should have brought relief. Instead, they felt like salt in a wound. He'd seen her last night. While I was sitting alone in a hotel room, staring at a positive pregnancy test I still hadn't told him about, he'd been with her, ending whatever they'd begun. No need, I said coldly, reaching into my desk drawer. I pulled out the divorce papers James had delivered that morning and tossed them onto the desk between us. They landed with a soft whump, the pages fanning out to reveal lines waiting for signatures. Sign them, I said. Then you and Chloe can do whatever you want. You'll have your girlfriend, I'll have my freedom, and we'll never have to see each other again. William stared at the papers as if they were a live snake. For a moment I saw genuine shock on his face, as if, despite everything, he hadn't truly believed I'd go through with it. Then his expression hardened. You're serious? Deadly. He picked up the papers, his hands trembling slightly. I'd never seen William's hands tremble before. Not during multi-billion-dollar negotiations, not when his father had died suddenly of a heart attack, not ever. You'll regret this, he said, his voice quiet but vibrating with intensity. You think you can do better? You think there's some perfect man out there who'll put up with your schedule, your ambition, your... He trailed off, but the implication hung in the air. Your coldness. Your emotional distance. All the things you think are flaws in me. Just sign the papers, William. For a long moment he just stared at me, his eyes searching my face for some sign of weakness, of hesitation. When he found none, something in him seemed to collapse. Fine, he said, the word explosive. Fine. But don't come crawling back when you realize what you've thrown away. He grabbed a pen from my desk, scrawled his signature on the highlighted lines with violent slashes of ink, then threw the pen down so hard it bounced off the desk and clattered to the floor. Happy, he snarled. Ecstatic. He turned and stormed out, the door slamming behind him with enough force to make the framed prints on my walls rattle. I stood there for a long time, listening to the echo of his anger fade into silence. Then slowly I gathered the signed papers, stacking them neatly, smoothing the crumpled corners. It was done. That night I went back to the Pacific Heights house to collect the rest of my things. I'd braced myself to find William there, brooding over a glass of whiskey in the darkened living room. I hadn't braced myself for Chloe. She was sitting on the sofa, my sofa in my living room, her pale hands clasping William's. The scene was so intimate, so domestic that for a moment I couldn't breathe. All my fault, she was saying, her voice thick with tears. If I hadn't come here, if I hadn't. It's not your fault. William's voice was rough, weary. He pulled his hand from hers and reached for the whiskey glass on the coffee table, draining it in one swallow. Victoria and I had problems long before you arrived. He turned toward her, and in the dim light I saw her face, radiant with sorrow, eyes glittering with unshed tears. The performance was masterful. She doesn't love you, Chloe whispered, leaning closer. Not the way I do. William's head dipped toward hers. And in that moment, Chloe's eyes flicked up and met mine over his shoulder. The triumph in her gaze was unmistakable. My footsteps on the hardwood finally startled them apart. William stood quickly, clearing his throat. Changed your mind? He asked, his voice low, hopeful. Decided to come back? I'm sorry to interrupt, I said, my voice perfectly polite. I'm just here to collect the rest of my things. I'll be quick. I turned toward the stairs, but William's voice stopped me. If you've got any pride, you won't take a single thing I bought you. I paused, then slowly turned back. He was standing now, his face twisted with a repressed rage I'd only seen glimpses of before. Dark circles etched the skin beneath his eyes, and his clothes looked like he'd slept in them. Everything in this house, he continued, his voice trembling with intensity. The art, the furniture, the jewelry, I paid for it. I gave it to you. So if you're leaving, leave. But don't take what's mine. For a moment I just looked at him. This man I'd shared a life with, a bed with, plans and dreams and quiet Sunday mornings with. This stranger. Then calmly I slipped the diamond wedding band from my finger. It came off easily as if it had been waiting for this moment. I set it on the hall table with a soft click. You forgot one thing, I said. This ring. You bought it when we got married. I believe it belongs to you. William's jaw twitched, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. He stared at the ring as if it were a poisonous insect. Without another word, I turned and continued up the stairs. My closet was a study in curated excess, row after row of designer dresses, shelves of handbags, drawers of cashmere and silk. I took only what I'd bought myself or inherited from my family. A few favorite pieces, photographs, the first edition art books my grandfather had collected. It didn't even fill one suitcase. I was zipping it closed when I heard a noise from downstairs, the sound of shattering glass. A moment later, William appeared in the doorway, breathing heavily. I don't want it, he said, his voice ragged. Trash like that, I don't ever want to see it again. He'd thrown the ring out the window. Into the night. Into the gardens below. I looked at him for a long moment, then shrugged. As long as that makes you happy. I pulled my suitcase from the bed and walked past him. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there blocking the doorway until I was close enough to feel the heat of his anger. Move, William. For a second I thought he might refuse. Then he stepped aside, his shoulder brushing mine as I passed. The last touch of our marriage, accidental and charged with everything unsaid. On the stairs I met Chloe coming up. She'd been waiting, I realized. Planning this moment. We stood there on the landing, me a few steps above her. She smiled, bright, triumphant, utterly devoid of the sorrow she'd shown William minutes earlier. You should know, she said, her voice sweet as poison. We slept together. Last week. After you threw your little tantrum about the pomegranate. I shook my head, a cold laugh escaping me. Congratulations. I tried to move past her, but she grabbed my wrist, her fingers digging in painfully. He never loved you, she hissed, all pretense of sweetness gone. Not from the beginning. He told me. He said marrying you was a business decision. That you were cold. That you. People love to flaunt what they don't actually have, I said, shaking off her grip. Her face contorted with rage. And then, before I could react, her hand shot out, not to hit me, but to grab the banister as she deliberately let herself fall backward. The sound was sickening, a series of thuds as she tumbled down the half-flight of stairs to the landing below. William came running, his face white with panic. He dropped to his knees beside her, his hands hovering, unsure where to touch. Chloe? Where does it hurt? Do we need to go to the hospital? She whimpered, clutching her ankle. I'm scared, Will. She pushed me. William's head snapped up, his eyes finding mine. They were blazing. What the hell is wrong with you? That was attempted murder. I stared at him, the words not computing at first. Then, slowly, I pointed to the corner of the ceiling where a discreet security camera was mounted. The footage is right there. You could check it before you accuse me of attempted murder. But he wasn't listening. He was too busy gathering Chloe into his arms, murmuring reassurances. Apologize, Victoria, he said, his voice like ice. I actually laughed. A short, shocked sound. You're serious? Yow. Something inside me broke then. Some final thread of hope or connection that had, despite everything, remained intact. Go to hell, William. He set Chloe down gently, then charged up the stairs. His hand closed around my wrist with bruising force. You're not leaving until you apologize to her. Let go of me. Apologize. I yanked my arm, trying to break his grip. My foot, still in the impractical heels I'd worn to the gallery, slipped on the polished wood. The world tilted, then spun. There was a moment of weightlessness, of terrifying disorientation. Then impact, a jolt that rattled my teeth, followed by a searing pain in my side. I lay on the landing, blinking up at the ceiling, trying to understand what had happened. Warmth spread through my abdomen, a familiar cramping that turned my blood to ice. Victoria. William's voice, suddenly uncertain. I tried to sit up, but the pain sharpened, taking my breath away. My hand went to my stomach, came away wet and dark. The last thing I saw before darkness swallowed me was William's face. His anger gone, replaced by dawning horror as he looked from my face to the blood on my hand to the stains spreading across my skirt. Then nothing. The first thing I registered was the smell, antiseptic and despair, the universal scent of hospitals. Then the light, harsh and fluorescent against my closed eyelids. Finally the pain, A dull, persistent ache low in my abdomen. Memory returned in fragments. The stairs. The fall. The blood. My eyes flew open. I was in a private room, the kind reserved for donors and dignitaries. Beyond the window, San Francisco glittered in the early morning light, the Bay Bridge a delicate necklace of lights against the fading dark. And in the chair beside my bed, slumped in exhausted sleep, was William. He looked wrecked. His usually immaculate suit was rumpled, his tie missing, the top buttons of his shirt undone. Stubble shadowed his jaw, and even in sleep, his face was tense, etched with lines I'd never seen before. As if sensing my wakefulness, his eyes opened. For a moment we just stared at each other, the silence between us thick with everything that had happened. "You're awake," he said, his voice rough with sleep and something else, relief maybe or guilt. He stood quickly, moving to adjust the pillow behind me with a carefulness that felt foreign. His hands, usually so sure and commanding, trembled slightly as he smoothed the sheets. "Don't try to sit up too quickly," he murmured. "The doctor said you need to rest." I ignored him, pushing myself upright despite the protesting pain. "The baby." The words hung between us, stark and terrible. William's face crumpled. Just for a second before he regained control. "Victoria. I'm so sorry." The world tilted, but not from physical pain this time. From the finality of it. The loss of something I hadn't even fully allowed myself to want until it was gone. "They did everything they could," William continued, his voice low and urgent, as if he could make me understand through sheer force of will. "But the fall, there was too much bleeding. They had to." He couldn't say it. Couldn't form the words. "A dinky," I finished flatly. "I know the term, William. I'm not a child." He flinched. "Don't be like that. We're both grieving." "Are we?" I looked at him, really looked at him, at the guilt in his eyes, at the careful concern he was performing like a role he'd rehearsed. "Because from where I'm sitting you got exactly what you wanted. No messy divorce complications. No child to tie you to a woman you don't love." "That's not true," he whispered, but the words lacked conviction. "Isn't it?" I leaned forward, ignoring the pain. "You accused me of attempted murder last night. Over her. You chose her side without a second thought. So tell me, William, how exactly are we both grieving?" He opened his mouth, closed it again. For the first time in our marriage he seemed to have no answer, no strategy, no carefully prepared statement. "We can have another baby," he said finally, the words desperate. "When you're healed. When we've worked through this. Let's not fight anymore, okay? Let's just start over." I stared at him. Then I began to laugh. A bright, brittle sound that didn't stop until tears streamed down my face. The laughter turned to sobs, harsh and ugly, shaking my already bruised body. William watched, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm. "Victoria. You want to know something funny?" I gasped between sobs. I never planned to keep it. The words landed in the silent room like stones in still water. William froze, his face going completely blank. "What?" "The baby." I wiped my eyes, the tears still coming. "I found out the day you stood me up on our anniversary. The day you chose to rescue Chloe instead of having dinner with your wife. I was going to tell you that night. I even ordered a cake." The memory rose, sharp and painful. The chocolate message melting into nothing. The empty restaurant reservation. The long walk home in bare feet. "But then you left," I continued, my voice steadying. "And I realized I couldn't bring a child into this. Into a marriage where its father would rather be with his mistress than at an anniversary dinner. Where he'd forget his wife's life-threatening allergy. Where he'd believe another woman over her." William's expression hardened, the guilt transforming into something colder, angrier. "You're lying." "Am I?" I reached for my phone on the bedside table, wincing at the movement. It took me a moment to find the photo. The positive test timestamped the morning of our anniversary. I turned the screen toward him. He stared at it, his face pale. "You were going to terminate our child? Without even telling me. It wasn't your choice." "The hell it wasn't." His control snapped, the words exploding from him. "I'm the father. I had a right to know. You can't just make that decision alone." "I can," I said quietly. "And I did. Because I won't bring a child into a broken home. And I won't let my child have a father who's irresponsible and heartless." "Irresponsible." He laughed, the sound harsh. Heartless. You're the one who was planning to kill our baby. To spare it, I shot back. From you. From your lies. From watching its father choose other women over its mother again and again. We were both breathing heavily now, the carefully maintained facade of our marriage stripped away to reveal the raw, ugly truth beneath. William took a step back, running a hand over his face. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, more controlled. I admit I made mistakes. I wavered. But can't you forgive me this once? For the sake of what we had. He moved closer, his hands coming up to grip my shoulders. Not painfully, but with an intensity that felt like its own kind of violence. Victoria, after all these years, was there never any real love? Any real feeling between us? I turned my head away, unable to look at him. Unable to answer. His hands fell away. You're so damn noble, he said, the words dripping with bitterness. So pure. In this city, men of my status, they have flings. They have mistresses. It's how the world works. But you'd rather burn everything down than accept an imperfect reality. He was talking himself into it, I realized. Justifying. Building the narrative that would allow him to walk away without guilt. Maybe you're right, I said, meeting his eyes again. Maybe I am too proud. But I'd rather be alone than share my husband. I'd rather be lonely than be lied to. William stared at me for a long moment. Then he nodded once, as if coming to a decision. Fine. Have it your way. But letting me go will be the worst mistake you ever make. Without me, you're nothing. A gallery owner with a famous last name. A society wife without a society. The words should have hurt. Instead, they felt like a release. The final truth spoken aloud. We'll see, I said. He turned and left without another word. The door clicked shut behind him, the sound final. The next week passed in a blur of medical procedures and legal formalities. I was discharged from the hospital after 2 days, against medical advice, and moved into a furnished apartment in Nob Hill that Evelyn had found for me. It was small and impersonal, with views of other buildings instead of the bay, but it was mine. William, true to his word, stopped bothering me. Aside from a terse email coordinating the divorce filing, he made no contact. The silence should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like its own kind of wound. But I had other things to focus on. The gossip columns had exploded with the news of our separation, and William's subsequent behavior only fueled the fire. The photos started appearing 3 days after I left the hospital. William and Chloe at top of the mark, her laughing as he leaned in to whisper something. William and Chloe at a charity auction, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. William and Chloe leaving a jewelry store on Maiden Lane, a distinctive blue bag in her hand. The captions wrote themselves. Sterling Capital CEO moves on quickly. From society wife to student sweetheart. The $20 million necklace that sealed the deal. Rachel brought me the papers one afternoon, her expression grim. It's everywhere. They're saying he bought her a Harry Winston necklace. That he's taking her to the Hamptons for the summer. That they're already talking about marriage. I skimmed the articles, my expression carefully neutral. People love a scandal. Aren't you angry? I'm busy, I said, which was true. With the divorce proceedings underway, I'd thrown myself into work with a ferocity that worried Evelyn. The Montgomery Gallery was expanding, not just the New York location but a potential partnership in London, a pop-up in Tokyo, a digital platform that could revolutionize how we sold art. And then there was the development project. The city had announced plans for a new cultural district in Dogpatch, a formerly industrial area south of downtown. The project included museum spaces, galleries, performance venues, and mixed-use residential buildings. The development rights were being put out to bid, and only 2 companies had the resources and reputation to win them: Montgomery Holdings and Sterling Capital. It was the ultimate irony. William and I, in the process of divorcing, were about to become direct competitors for the most significant cultural development in San Francisco in a decade. You can't be serious, James said when I told him my plans. Bidding against William? No. Looks petty, Victoria. It looks like revenge. It's business, I said calmly. The Montgomery Gallery is the obvious choice to anchor the cultural component. We have the connections, the reputation, the vision. And William has the capital. And the political connections. And a decade of experience developing commercial properties. Which is exactly why the city needs us, I countered. To ensure it doesn't become just another soulless development. To make sure there's art, not just architecture. James sighed, recognizing the set of my jaw. Fine. But you'll need help. Your current team is stretched thin with the expansions. Then hire more people, I said. The best. I don't care what it costs. Evelyn took the mandate and ran with it. A week later, she buzzed me in my office. The new team is here for introductions. I walked out to find 6 men standing in the gallery's main space. They were, to put it mildly, spectacular. Not just handsome, though they were that in a variety of ways, but radiating competence. Sharp suits, sharper eyes, the kind of presence that filled a room. Good afternoon, Victoria, they said in unison, their voices a harmonious blend of deep and resonant. I blinked, turning to Evelyn. And these are? She covered her mouth, stifling a laugh. A little celebration of your singlehood, she whispered. And some capable assistants, of course. Dropping her voice further, she added, I wasn't sure what type you preferred. Refined, sly, mature, brooding. So I gathered a selection. I arched a brow, looking over the lineup again. There was Mark with the soulful eyes and architectural background. Alex, sharp and analytical with a finance MBA from Wharton. Ben, whose family owned half of Napa and had political connections to match. David, a former museum director with impeccable taste. Leo, a tech whiz who'd sold his startup for 9 figures before turning 30. And James. The second James, to avoid confusion with my lawyer, who was simply devastatingly beautiful in a way that felt almost unfair. Excellent, I said, a genuine smile touching my lips for the first time in weeks. Bring me this project and everyone's bonus doubles. Evelyn's recruits were, as promised, terrifyingly competent. They were also excellent company, charming, witty, and unwaveringly loyal. I started bringing them to meetings, to negotiations, to the endless rounds of schmoozing required to win a project of this scale. It didn't take long for the tabloids to notice. Queen Victoria and her court, one headline read, beneath a photo of me arriving at a planning commission meeting with Mark and Alex on either side. Montgomery moves on in style, proclaimed another, featuring a shot of me laughing with Leo and James at the opera opening night. I found it amusing, honestly. After weeks of being painted as the scorned society wife, the narrative was shifting. I was no longer the victim. I was the victor, or at least a formidable contender. William apparently did not find it amusing. Our first direct confrontation came at a business dinner at the Battery, hosted by the mayor to discuss the dog patch project. I'd brought Mark and Alex. William had brought Chloe. She was wearing the necklace from the papers. A stunning diamond and sapphire piece that probably did cost $20 million. The dress was couture, the shoes were impossibly high, and her expression as she looked at me was pure, unadulterated triumph. Victoria, she said, gliding over with a champagne flute in hand. What a surprise. I didn't think this was your scene. Chloe, I replied, my voice neutral. I didn't realize Harbor University was so light on coursework. Shouldn't you be studying? Her smile tightened. Will believes in work-life balance. And he wanted me here. How thoughtful. I glanced past her to where William was watching us, his expression unreadable. Though if I recall, your advisor is Dr. Lawson, and he's taking his graduate students to a conference in Berlin next week. You're not going. Color touched her cheeks. That's none of your business. She looked over my shoulder at Mark, who was chatting with the deputy mayor. Found a new favorite already? Not surprising. It must get lonely in that big empty apartment. My smile didn't waver. President Montgomery, Mark said, appearing at my side as if summoned. The mayor is ready for you. Who's your friend? Chloe's face flushed an unbecoming shade of red. I couldn't help it, I laughed. You bitch, she hissed, the words barely audible. Then before I could react, she lifted her champagne glass and threw the contents, not at me but at Mark. The liquid hit him square in the chest, soaking his shirt and tie. Oops, she said, not sounding sorry at all. Clumsy me. For a moment, everything froze. Then, moving with deliberate calm, I picked up a nearby glass of red wine from a passing tray and poured it over Chloe's head. The gasp was audible through the entire room. Red wine dripped from her hair onto the $20 million necklace, staining the couture dress. You don't touch my people, I said, my voice quiet but carrying. Chloe stared at me, open-mouthed, wine running down her face. Then she shrieked, a high, piercing sound that cut through the murmur of conversation. William was at her side in an instant, his face dark with anger. He shot me a look of pure venom before signaling to a server. "Take her downstairs. Get her cleaned up." Chloe was still spluttering, still trying to form words, but William cut her off. "Yow," she went, shooting me a look of such hatred I almost felt impressed. William turned to me. "Was that necessary?" "She started it. She's 20 years old, Victoria. You're not." The implication, that I should be more mature, more forgiving, more something, hung between us. "Age doesn't excuse being a terrible person," I said, then turned to Mark. "Let's get you cleaned up." I sent Mark home in a car service, then stepped out onto the balcony for air. The night was cool, the city spread out below like a jeweled blanket. Inside, the dinner continued, the awkward incident already being smoothed over by professional socialites. I didn't hear him approach. One moment I was alone, the next a hand reached through the heavy curtain, grabbing my wrist. "Long time no see," William said, his voice low. He looked terrible. Thinner, with hollows under his eyes and a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. The impeccably groomed William Sterling was gone, replaced by this haunted, angry version. "Let go of me," I said, trying to pull my wrist free. His grip tightened, crushing. "What are you doing, Victoria? This little game with your assistants. This bid against me. What do you think you're accomplishing?" "I'm living my life," I snapped. "Something you should try sometime instead of playing sugar daddy to a college student." The words hit their mark. His eyes darkened, and before I could react, he stepped too close, blocking my escape, his desperation unmistakable. I gagged, pushing against his chest, but he was stronger, angrier, more desperate than I'd ever seen him. Finally, I did the only thing I could think of. I bit his lip hard enough to taste blood. He jerked back with a sharp inhale. I didn't hesitate, I slapped him, the sound ringing in the quiet night. "Have you lost your mind?" I wiped my mouth furiously. "If you're in heat, go to your Chloe. Get her to play whatever messed up games you're into." William touched his lip, his fingers coming away red. And then, inexplicably, he laughed. "You do still care about me." "I care about not being assaulted by my soon-to-be ex-husband." His smile faded, replaced by something raw and vulnerable. "You win, Victoria. I can't do this. I can't live without you." The words should have meant something. Once they would have meant everything. "I don't regret it," I said, stepping back. "Leaving you was the best decision of my life." His pupils contracted. A bitter smile curved his lips. 38 days. 6 hours. 58 minutes. Every second has been torture. I can't eat. I can't sleep. And when I finally do, I dream of you. But when I wake up, the only thing beside me is an empty bed. My mind is full of you. I tell myself to move on, but I can't. I drown myself in liquor, in parties, in anything to forget. But I can't forget. The confession hung between us, stark and painful in its honesty. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I remembered the video. The way he'd kissed her. The way he'd chosen her again and again. "I'm sorry, William," I said, my voice cold. "But none of that has anything to do with me." He dropped to his knees then, right there on the balcony, clutching at my legs. "Victoria, please. Tell me what to do. Tell me how to make you forgive me." He held up his left hand, showing me the wedding band he still wore. His eyes shone with desperate hope. "See? I've kept it. I've kept our vows." Suddenly, his gaze shifted, focusing on something over my shoulder. The diamond ring. The one he'd thrown out the window. "Your ring," he whispered, releasing me. "I have to find it." Before I could respond, he was on his feet, pushing past me through the curtains back into the party. "William," someone called. "The mayor is waiting." But he didn't hear them. He was already at the door, already disappearing into the night. I stood on the balcony for a long time after he'd gone, staring at the city without seeing it. The chill seeped through my dress, but I barely felt it. Somewhere in this city, William was searching for a ring he'd thrown away in anger. Somewhere in this city, Chloe was probably crying over a ruined dress. And somewhere in this city, I was standing alone on a balcony, wondering how the hell my life had come to this. The curtains parted again. This time it was Mark holding my coat. "Car's ready," he said gently. "You okay?" I looked at him, at his kind eyes, at the concern in his expression. At the way he'd taken a glass of champagne to the chest without complaint, without making a scene. "I will be," I said, and for the first time I almost believed it. I took the coat, letting him guide me back inside, through the party, out into the waiting night. Behind us, the dinner continued, the conversations flowing around the empty spaces where we'd been, filling them in as if we'd never been there at all. The news reached me the next morning as I was reviewing the dog patch proposal with my team. Evelyn knocked quietly on the conference room door, her face pale. "Victoria, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this." She placed her tablet on the table. The screen showed a local news article with a headline that made my stomach drop. "Sterling Capital CEO hospitalized after night search in private lake." Below was a blurry photo of William being loaded into an ambulance, wrapped in a foil blanket, his face ashen. What happened? My voice sounded strange to my own ears, detached, clinical. "Apparently he went back to your house, the Pacific Heights house, last night after the dinner. The security guard found him this morning, waist deep in the lake behind the property. Hypothermia. They think he was searching for something. The ring. He'd actually gone looking for it. In the dark. In the cold." For a long moment no one in the room spoke. Mark, Alex, Ben, David, Leo, James. They all watched me, waiting for my reaction. I picked up the tablet, scanning the article. Minor hypothermia. Expected to recover. No comment from Sterling Capital. "When was this?" I asked. "They pulled him out around 4 a.m. He's at UCSF Medical Center." I handed the tablet back to Evelyn. "Thank you. Let's get back to the proposal. Mark, you were saying about the zoning variances." They all stared at me. Even Evelyn looked shocked. "Victoria," Mark said gently. "Don't you want to, I don't know, go see him?" I looked around the table at their faces, concerned, confused, judgmental. They thought I was being cold. Heartless. Maybe I was. "He made his choices," I said evenly. "Now I'm making mine. The dog patch proposal is due in 72 hours. I'd like to focus on that." The meeting continued, but the energy had shifted. They were professionals, so they pushed through, but I could feel their eyes on me, their unspoken questions hanging in the air. When we broke for lunch, Evelyn followed me back to my office. "The flight to London is booked for tomorrow," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "You have meetings with the Tate Modern directors on Wednesday, the National Gallery on Thursday. The partnership could be a game-changer for the Tokyo expansion." "Good." She hesitated. "Victoria, are you sure about this? Leaving now? With William in the hospital and the dog patch proposal due. The London meetings have been scheduled for months." "William's," I almost said tantrum, but stopped myself. "William's situation doesn't change my business commitments." Evelyn studied me for a long moment. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll have the car pick you up at 6 tomorrow morning." After she left, I closed my office door and sat at my desk, staring at the skyline without seeing it. My hands were steady on the keyboard, my breathing even. I looked like someone in complete control. Inside I was screaming. The flight to London was 12 hours of tortured introspection. I tried to work, tried to sleep, tried to lose myself in the in-flight entertainment. Nothing worked. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw William, kneeling on the balcony, begging for forgiveness. Searching in a dark lake for a ring he'd thrown away. Lying in a hospital bed, alone. I landed at Heathrow in a haze of exhaustion. My phone buzzed with messages as soon as I turned it on. Updates from my team, reminders about meetings, and one from Evelyn that made my breath catch. "William checked himself out of the hospital this morning. He went straight to the gallery looking for you. When I told him you'd left the country, he insisted on knowing where you were. I'm sorry, Victoria. He threatened legal action if I didn't give him your London hotel information." I stared at the message, a cold dread settling in my stomach. He's coming here. The meetings passed in a blur. I presented the partnership proposal to the Tate directors, discussed loan agreements with the National Gallery, negotiated terms with potential investors. I was sharp, focused, impressive by all accounts. And all the while part of me was waiting. Watching doors. Listening for footsteps. He found me on the third day in Trafalgar Square. I'd taken an hour between meetings to clear my head, to watch the tourists and pigeons and Londoners rushing through their lives. The afternoon was grey and damp, typical English weather that felt like a metaphor for my mood. I didn't see him approach. One moment I was alone, the next he was there beside me, his reflection appearing in the puddle at my feet. Victoria. I turned slowly. He looked worse than he had on the balcony, gaunt, pale, with shadows so deep under his eyes they looked like bruises. His clothes hung on him as if he'd lost weight rapidly. The stubble on his jaw had grown into something closer to a beard, ragged and unkempt. But his eyes were the most shocking, red-rimmed, bloodshot, burning with a desperate intensity. William. My voice was calm, betraying none of the turmoil inside. What are you doing here? From his pocket he drew out the diamond ring. It was muddy, the platinum scratched, but unmistakably the one he'd thrown from our bedroom window. The one he'd searched for in the lake. He dropped to one knee right there on the damp pavement, tourists streaming around us, oblivious. I found it, he said, his voice trembling. It took me all night, but I found it. Don't you see? It's a sign. Our fate isn't broken. It's still here. It was just waiting to be found again. He held the ring up, the diamond catching what little light filtered through the London gloom. Victoria Montgomery Sterling. Will you marry me? Again. For a long moment I just looked at him, this broken, desperate man kneeling in a puddle in Trafalgar Square, offering me a muddy ring and a second chance at a marriage that had nearly destroyed us both. I thought of the baby we'd lost, of the lies he'd told, of the way he'd chosen Chloe again and again, until there was nothing left to choose. William, I said softly, a broken bracelet leaves a scar. A shattered mirror can't be made whole again. We need to look forward, not back. He stared up at me, his expression shifting from hope to confusion to dawning horror. What are you saying? I'm saying no. The words hung between us, final and absolute. Slowly he stood, the ring still clutched in his muddy hand. You're right, he said, his voice strangely calm now. You're absolutely right. He slipped the ring back into his pocket, his movements deliberate. Then let's start as friends. I'll stay by your side. I'll prove to you that I've changed. However long it takes. William. No, listen to me. He reached for my hand, but I pulled back. I was wrong. About everything. I took you for granted. I got distracted by something shiny and new. But you're my life, Victoria. You always have been. I just didn't realize it until I lost you. I opened my mouth to respond, to tell him it was too late, that some breaks couldn't be mended, some trust couldn't be rebuilt. And then the world exploded. The sound came first. A deafening boom that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then the screams. Then the chaos. People were running, shouting, falling. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Get down. William shouted, shoving me to the ground. His body covered mine, a human shield against whatever was happening. I heard him grunt, a sharp, pained sound. He collapsed moments later, his weight heavy against me. William. He didn't answer. I tried to move to see his face, but he was heavy, unmoving. William. More screams. More running. The air smelled of smoke and something coppery, blood. Finally his weight shifted. He rolled off me, his face pale, his breathing labored. There was a dark stain spreading across his chest, blooming like a terrible flower. William. I pressed my hands against the wound, trying to stanch the flow of blood. My fingers came away slick and red. He smiled then, a faint, painful twisting of his lips. See, he whispered. I can protect you. I can be what you need. Don't talk. Save your strength. But he kept talking, his voice growing weaker with each word. I love you, Victoria. I should have said it every day. I should have shown you. His eyes fluttered closed. William. Stay with me. Help. Somebody help. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Around us, chaos reigned, people crying, shouting, tending to wounds. A terrorist attack, someone said. A lone gunman. Or maybe a bomb. The details were unclear, unimportant. All that mattered was the man bleeding out in my arms. If I had another life, William whispered, his eyes opening briefly to meet mine, I would love you properly. From the very beginning. And then, breath by ragged breath, he slipped away. The paramedics arrived, pulling me away from him, working on his still form with desperate efficiency. I stood there, covered in his blood, watching as they loaded him into an ambulance, as they worked on him even as the doors closed, as the vehicle sped away with sirens screaming. Someone wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. Someone else tried to guide me away from the scene. I didn't move. Couldn't move. In my mind I saw him, not as he was now, bleeding and broken on London pavement, but as he had been. The cold, controlled man I'd married. The scornful husband who'd forgotten my allergy. The furious man who'd accused me of attempted murder. The desperate one who'd searched a lake for a ring. One by one, his faces flashed before me like slides in a projector, each one a piece of the complex, contradictory man I'd loved and lost twice over. My chest constricted, a physical pain so sharp I couldn't breathe. He'd whispered love with his dying breath, but it had come too late. Far too late. Tears blurred everything. The square, the emergency vehicles, the blood on my hands. I wanted to forgive him. In that moment, with his blood still warm on my skin, I wanted nothing more than to go back, to fix what had been broken. But the wounds ran too deep. The trust was too shattered. The loss of our marriage, of our child, and now perhaps of him, was too complete. Clutching the emptiness he'd left behind, I realized with devastating clarity that heartbreak could kill, but it would not end. It would live on, in memories, in regrets, in the ghost of what might have been. The next 48 hours passed in a nightmarish blur. British authorities questioned me relentlessly, about the attack, about William, about why we'd been in the square together. I answered mechanically, the words leaving my mouth without passing through my conscious mind. William was in surgery for 9 hours. The bullet had nicked his lung, missed his heart by millimeters. He was in critical but stable condition, the doctors said. He'd live. Probably. I sat in the waiting room of University College Hospital, the blanket still around my shoulders, William's blood still under my fingernails. Evelyn flew in from San Francisco, arriving pale and worried, her usual composure shattered. "Victoria," she whispered, hugging me, a breach of professional boundaries she'd never allowed herself before. "By God. Are you all right?" "He saved my life," I said, the words sounding distant, someone else's. "He took the bullet for me." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Victoria." I didn't cry. I hadn't cried since the square. The tears had dried up, leaving something hollow and aching in their place. William's family arrived, his mother stern and elegant even in crisis, his sister red-eyed and trembling, a cousin who handled the logistics with military precision. They barely looked at me, their anger and blame a palpable force in the sterile hospital corridor. I didn't care. Let them hate me. I had enough hate for myself. On the second day the doctor said I could see him. Briefly. He was pale against the white sheets, machines beeping and whirring around him, tubes snaking from his body. But his eyes were open and they found mine immediately. "Victoria." His voice was a rough whisper, barely audible over the machines. I moved to the bedside, my hands clenched at my sides. "Don't talk. Save your strength." "Did you mean it?" he asked, ignoring me. "What you said in the square. About not being able to go back." I looked at him, at the man who had been my husband, who had betrayed me, who had saved me. At the impossible tangle of love and hate and grief that bound us together. "William." "Because I meant what I said," he continued, his voice gaining strength. "I love you. I've always loved you. I was just too stupid, too proud, too." He trailed off, coughing, a pain sound that made the machines beep faster. "Don't," I whispered. "Please don't." But he kept going, his eyes burning with that same desperate intensity I'd seen in Trafalgar Square. "Give me another chance. Let me prove it to you. However long it takes. However hard it is. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you." The words hung between us, a promise and a plea. I thought of the life we'd had, the beautiful empty shell of a marriage. I thought of the life we might have had if things had been different. If he'd been different. If I'd been different. Mostly I thought of the blood on my hands. His blood. The ultimate terrible proof of a love that had come too late to save us, but just in time to destroy any possibility of clean escape. "Rest," I said finally, my voice hollow. "We'll talk when you're stronger." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. And in William's eyes, I saw hope flare, bright, painful, devastating hope. I left London 3 days later, against medical advice and the protests of William's family. The dog patch proposal was due, and despite everything, despite the attack, despite William, despite the blood that still seemed to stain my skin no matter how many times I washed, business waited for no one. Evelyn flew back with me, her concern a silent, steady presence. She handled everything, the the flight, the hotel, the messages piling up on my phone. She was, as always, terrifyingly competent. The proposal submission was a blur. My team had done magnificent work in my absence, pulling together a vision for the dogpatch development that was ambitious, beautiful, and, most importantly, financially viable. We submitted it with minutes to spare, then gathered in the gallery's main space, exhausted and elated. "Whatever happens," Mark said, raising a glass of champagne, "we did exceptional work. You should be proud." They all looked at me, waiting for me to say something. To celebrate. To acknowledge the mountain we'd climbed. "Thank you," I said, my voice flat. "All of you. The work is exceptional." The celebration felt hollow. Forced. They knew about London, about William. They'd seen the news coverage, the photos of me covered in blood, the speculation about whether William Sterling would survive, and what it meant for Sterling Capital's bid. They didn't know about the ring. About the proposal. About the choice that hung over me, waiting to be made. 2 days later, the city announced the winner of the dogpatch development rights. It wasn't us. Sterling Capital had won, with a bid that was less ambitious but more financially secure. The analysis in the business section was brutal. Montgomery's vision was bold but risky. Sterling's was safe, secure, and backed by deeper pockets. In the end, capitalism chose caution over creativity. I read the article in my office, the morning sunlight feeling like a personal insult. Outside, my team moved quietly, their disappointment a tangible presence in the gallery. Evelyn buzzed. "William is on line 1. I stared at the phone. For a long moment I considered not answering. Letting it go to voicemail. Letting him think I wasn't here, wasn't available, wasn't interested. Then I picked it up. "Congratulations on the bid." His voice was stronger now, though still rough around the edges. "Victoria. I didn't call about that." "No. I want to see you. To talk. Properly." I closed my eyes. "William, I don't think that's a good idea. Please." The word was stripped bare, vulnerable in a way William Sterling never allowed himself to be. "One conversation. That's all I'm asking. If after that you never want to see me again, I'll respect it. I'll sign whatever divorce papers you put in front of me. I'll disappear from your life forever." The promise hung between us, tempting in its finality. "Where?" asked finally. "The house. Our house. Tonight. 7 o'clock. I arrived at 7:15, intentionally late. The Pacific Heights house looked the same as it always had. Imposing, elegant, a monument to a life that no longer existed. William opened the door before I could knock. He was dressed casually, jeans and a sweater, a startling departure from his usual suits. He looked better than he had in London, the color returning to his face, though he was still too thin, the lines around his eyes still too deep. "Victoria." He stepped aside to let me in. "Thank you for coming." The house was different. Not in its furnishings or layout, but in its feeling. The art I'd chosen was gone, packed away or sold. The personal touches, the photographs, the books, the little collected treasures from our travels, were missing. It was a shell, beautiful and empty. "You changed things," I said, my voice echoing in the cavernous foyer. "It didn't feel like a home without you," he said simply. "So I had it cleared out. A fresh start. If you want it." I didn't respond. Couldn't. He led me to the living room where a fire crackled in the fireplace. 2 glasses of wine sat on the coffee table along with a folder. "Sit," he said. "Please." I sat, perching on the edge of the sofa, poised for flight. William sat opposite me, his eyes never leaving my face. For a long moment neither of us spoke. The only sound was the fire and the distant hum of the city beyond the windows. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," William said finally. "About us. About what went wrong." I stayed silent, waiting. "It was never Chloe," he said, the name hanging between us like a ghost. "I mean it was, but it wasn't. She was a symptom of something broken in me. Of something missing." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped. "I grew up watching my parents. Their marriage was a business arrangement, pure and simple. They respected each other. They worked well together. But there was no love. No passion. No joy." He looked up at me, his eyes dark and serious. "I thought that was what marriage was. A partnership. A merger. And what we had, it was a good merger, Victoria. We were good together. We built something impressive. But it wasn't enough, I said softly. No, he shook his head. It wasn't. And instead of talking to you about it, instead of trying to build something more, I looked for it elsewhere. In someone who looked at me like I was a person, not a portfolio. In someone who didn't know all my flaws, all my failures. In someone easy. The honesty was disarming. Brutal in its self-awareness. I was wrong, he continued. So wrong. What we had, it was real. It was deep. And I threw it away for something shallow and meaningless. He picked up the folder from the table, handed it to me. Open it. Inside were documents, legal documents, but not the ones I expected. Not divorce papers. Something else entirely. It's the Doc Patch project, he said as I scanned the pages. All of it. The rights, the plans, everything. Sterling Capital is withdrawing. Montgomery Holdings can have it. If you want it. I stared at him, disbelief warring with suspicion. Why? Because you deserve it, he said simply. Because your vision was better. Because it's the right thing to do. He paused, his eyes meeting mine. And because I want to show you that I've changed. That I'm not the man who would choose winning over what's right. Not anymore. The gesture was enormous. Unprecedented. A multi-billion-dollar project handed over like a bouquet of flowers. I can't accept this, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Why not? Because it's not a gift, William. It's a bribe. A transaction. You're trying to buy my forgiveness. No, he shook his head, his expression earnest. I'm trying to show you who I want to be. The man who puts you first. The man who values what you value. The man who deserves you. He stood, moving to kneel in front of me, not in the dramatic public way he had in Trafalgar Square, but quietly, humbly. I love you, Victoria. I think I always have, from the moment you walked into that boardroom and argued with me about the valuation of your family's company. You were fierce and brilliant and beautiful, and you scared the hell out of me. He took my hands in his. They were warm, steady, familiar. Let me spend the rest of my life loving you properly. Let me be the husband I should have been from the beginning. I looked down at our joined hands. At the man kneeling before me. At the impossible choice laid at my feet. Forgiveness or freedom. Second chance or a clean break. The devil I knew or the unknown future. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows across his face. Outside, the city glittered, indifferent to our drama. Somewhere in this house was a ring he'd pulled from a lake. Somewhere in this city was a grave for a child we'd never meet. Somewhere in the world was a girl with dimples who had broken us, but only because we were already cracked. William, I began, my voice trembling. And then the doorbell rang. The doorbell rang again, sharp and insistent in the quiet house. William didn't move, his eyes still fixed on mine, willing me to finish my sentence, to give him the answer he so desperately wanted. Ignore it, he whispered. But the bell rang a third time, followed by knocking, not polite but urgent pounding. Mr. Sterling. San Francisco Police. Open the door. William's expression shifted from earnest pleading to confused alarm. He stood, reluctantly releasing my hands. Stay here. He moved to the door, peering through the side light before opening it. Two police officers stood on the step, their expressions grim. Behind them, half hidden in the shadows of the driveway, was Chloe. She looked different than the last time I'd seen her. Paler, thinner, her eyes hollow. The triumphant girl from the staircase was gone, replaced by someone brittle and desperate. Mr. Sterling, the taller officer said. We need to speak with you about a missing persons report. Missing person? William stepped outside, partially closing the door behind him, but I could still hear the conversation through the crack. Who's missing? Miss Dawson's roommate, Jessica Lee, the officer said. She hasn't been seen in 48 hours. Miss Dawson says you were the last person to see her. William's voice was tight, controlled. I haven't seen Jessica since, I don't know, a university event last month. Certainly not in the last 48 hours. Miss Dawson says otherwise. The officer's tone was neutral, professional, but carried an edge. She says you and Jessica were involved. That there was an argument. That you threatened her. That's absurd. William's control was slipping, a thread of anger weaving into his words. I barely knew the girl. Chloe stepped forward then, her voice trembling with theatrical tears. Well, please, just tell them where she is. Jessica was my friend. Her parents are worried sick. I stood, moving silently to the door, watching through the gap. The scene outside was surreal, lit by the flashing lights of the police cruiser, the fog rolling in from the bay making everything seem dreamlike and menacing. "This is harassment," William said, his voice cold now. The William Sterling who intimidated boardrooms was back, the vulnerable man from moments ago gone. "If you have questions, contact my lawyer. But get off my property. Now." The officers exchanged a look. "We'll be in touch, Mr. Sterling. In the meantime, don't leave the city." They turned, leading a weeping Chloe back to their car. William watched them go, his back rigid with tension. Only when the taillights disappeared down the hill did he turn and see me standing in the doorway. His face was a mask of fury. "She's lying. You know that, right? This is some twisted revenge because I cut her off." I didn't say anything. Just looked at him, at the anger twisting his features, at the man who had just been on his knees promising to be better. "Victoria," he said, his voice softening as he registered my expression. "You don't believe her, do you?" "I don't know what to believe anymore." The words came out flat, exhausted. "A girl is missing. The police are at your door. And Chloe is involved. Again. I had nothing to do with it." The denial was explosive, too loud in the quiet night. He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture agitated. "God, can't you see what she's doing? He's trying to destroy me. To punish me for choosing you." "Did you?" I asked quietly. "Choose me?" He stared at me, confusion replacing anger. "What?" "Just now. When the police were here. You became someone else. The cold, angry William. The one who intimidates and threatens. Not the man who was promising to change. I was being accused of something I didn't do." "I know." I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold despite the fire. "But it's who you become when you're threatened. And that man. I can't live with that man, William. Not again." The truth of it settled between us, heavy and final. However much he wanted to change, however sincere his promises, the core of him, the ruthless, controlling, angry core, was still there. It would always be there. "So that's it." His voice was hollow now, all fight gone. "After everything. After I took a bullet for you. After I'm trying to give you everything. You're leaving?" "You didn't take a bullet for me, William." The words were gentle, but they landed like blows. "You took a bullet because you were there. Because you followed me to London. Because you wouldn't let go." I stepped past him out into the cool night air. The fog wrapped around me like a shroud. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Home." The word felt strange on my tongue. I wasn't sure where home was anymore. Not this house. Not the sterile apartment. Not the gallery. Somewhere else. Somewhere new. "Victoria, wait." He followed me onto the driveway. "The dog patch project. It's yours. Regardless of what happens with us." I meant that. I turned to look at him one last time. In the misty darkness, he looked like a ghost of the man I'd married. All sharp angles and shadows, the substance of him eroded by lies and loss. "Keep it," I said. "Build something good. Something that matters. Be the man you promised you'd be. Even if it's not for me." Then I walked away down the hill into the fog and didn't look back. The next month passed in a blur of motion and distance. I didn't go back to London. Didn't stay in San Francisco. Instead, I went to Tokyo to oversee the new gallery opening, then to Paris for meetings, then to a small island in Greece where there was no internet, no news, no reminders of the life I'd left behind. Evelyn handled everything with her usual terrifying competence. The divorce was finalized, the papers signed remotely. William didn't contest anything, didn't fight for assets or concessions. The settlement was exactly what our prenup stipulated, clean, fair, and utterly devoid of the messiness that had characterized our marriage. The missing girl, Jessica Lee, turned up in Lake Tahoe 2 days after the police visit to William's house. She'd gone on a spontaneous trip with a new boyfriend and forgotten to tell anyone. The police apologized to William. Chloe vanished from the news, from Harbor University, from San Francisco altogether. Rumor had it her father had shipped her off to Europe, a pattern apparently. William won the dog patch project but announced he was stepping down as CEO of Sterling Capital to focus on it personally. The business pages were full of speculation about his motives, about the new direction for the famously ruthless financier. I didn't read them, or I tried not to. In Greece, on a whitewashed terrace overlooking the Aegean Sea, I finally allowed myself to stop. To breathe. To grieve properly, not just for William but for the marriage, for the baby, for the woman I'd been when I believed in forever. One morning, as the sun rose over the water, painting everything in gold, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me open it. It was William. Not a plea, not a promise. Just 4 words. I'm building something good. Attached was a photograph, not of a construction site or architectural plans, but of a community garden in the Mission, one that Sterling Capital had just funded. A group of children were planting vegetables, their faces smudged with dirt and joy. I stared at the photo for a long time. Then slowly I typed a reply. I'm glad. I didn't hear from him again. 6 months later, I was back in San Francisco for the opening of the Montgomery Gallery's new wing. A stunning addition that doubled our exhibition space and included a rooftop sculpture garden with views of the bay. The party was everything I'd worked for. The city's cultural elite mingling with artists and collectors, champagne flowing, the air buzzing with excitement about the upcoming season. I moved through the crowd in a gown of deep emerald green, smiling, shaking hands, accepting congratulations. I was where I'd always wanted to be, at the center of my own world on my own terms. And then I saw him. William stood across the room, near a monumental steel sculpture by Richard Serra. He was talking with the mayor, but his eyes found mine immediately. He looked different. Still William Sterling, still commanding, still beautiful in that sharp, angular way. But softer somehow. The perpetual tension in his shoulders was gone. He smiled at something the mayor said, and it reached his eyes. A real smile, not the calculated one he used in boardrooms. Our gazes held for a moment across the crowded room. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. I returned it. Then we both turned back to our conversations, to our lives, to the separate paths we'd chosen. Later, as the party was winding down, I slipped away to the rooftop garden. The night was clear, the stars sharp against the velvet sky, the city spread out below like a circuit board of light. It's beautiful. I turned. William stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the light from inside. It is, I agreed. He moved to stand beside me at the railing, not too close but not at a formal distance either. A respectful space between us. The gallery is spectacular, he said. You should be proud. I am. I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in months. I heard about the community center in Dogpatch. The affordable housing component. The green spaces. It's not what I expected from Sterling Capital. It's not what I expected either. He smiled, a real one that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Turns out building things people actually need is more satisfying than building portfolios. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the lights of the Bay Bridge. How are you, Victoria? He asked finally, his voice gentle. I considered the question. The honest answer was complicated. A tangle of grief and growth, of loneliness and liberation. But the simple answer, the true one, was, I'm okay. Getting there. He nodded. Good. I'm glad. Another silence, this one stretching longer. The sounds of the party drifted up from below. Laughter, music, the clink of glasses. I should go, William said finally. I just wanted to see you. To see that you're all right. Thank you for coming. He turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth. I'm trying to be better. Not for you. Not to win you back. Just because it's the right thing to do. I know, I said softly. I can see it. He smiled again, smaller this time, but genuine. Then he was gone, disappearing back into the gallery, back into his life. I stayed on the rooftop long after the party ended, after the lights inside were dimmed, after the city settled into its nighttime rhythm. The fracture that had shattered our marriage was still there. A crack in the foundation of my life that would never fully heal. Some losses are too profound, some betrayals too deep, to ever be completely overcome. But as I looked out at the city, at the life I'd built from the wreckage, I realized something. A broken vase can never hold water again. But the pieces can be arranged into something new. A mosaic, perhaps, where the cracks become part of the pattern, where the breaks tell a story of survival. William and I would never be what we were. We would never be what we might have been. But we were both finally becoming who we were meant to be. The wind picked up, cool off the bay, carrying with it the salt smell of the ocean and the distant sound of foghorns. Somewhere in this city, William was driving home to an empty house, just as I would soon return to an empty apartment. But the emptiness felt different now. Not like something missing but like something possible. Space for what came next. I took one last look at the stars, then turned and went inside, closing the door to the rooftop behind me. The gallery was quiet now, the art glowing in the low light, waiting for tomorrow's visitors, for new eyes, new interpretations, new stories. My heels clicked on the polished concrete floor, the sound echoing in the vast space. At the door I paused, looking back at what I'd built, not just the gallery but the life. The messy, complicated, painful, beautiful life. Then I stepped out into the night, into the city, into whatever came next. The fracture would always be part of me. But so would the strength it took to keep walking, to keep building, to keep becoming. And that, I realized as I hailed a cab and gave the driver my address, was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. The end.